Hey 707, hope you're having a great time in your life groups. We have a few quick announcements for you and we'll jump into today's message in just a few minutes. First of all, we have our Detroit applications available. You can download those offline or grab them next week at 707, but we need to get those turned in soon, so make sure you don't wait too long and get those in on the deadline. Next week is our first 708 of 2019. We're super excited as we're bringing back the Silent Disco and Donuts. It's sure to be an amazing time. We want you to think about who you're going to be inviting. As a matter of fact, right now in your life groups, I want you to just take a second, pause the video, and everyone go around and share the 2 or 3 people you're going to be inviting out to 708 for next week. The last announcement is our 707 Winter Retreat. And the price break deadline for the early bird pricing is tonight. At midnight, the price goes up by $40 to $180. And so we want you to get those turned in because we don't want anything to stop you from coming with us. So go home, make sure you get yourself registered if you haven't done so already. If you need to turn in a scholarship application, those were technically due today as well. We'll give you a little extra time on the scholarship application, but make sure you get that to us as soon as you can, so we can accept that scholarship application and get you on the trip. If you are not sure what to expect with Winter Retreat, or you just want to get excited about it, go ahead and watch this video.
Of you, how I love you. You're so much better than I thought, and so I give up all I got to see one glimpse of you, how I love you. Let my whole being worship you. Let my whole being worship you. You are my I rejoice in your goodness. All I am for your glory. I rejoice in your goodness. I will dance for your glory. I rejoice in your goodness. All I am for your glory. I rejoice in your goodness. I will dance for your glory.
All right, that's all we have for announcements. We're looking forward to seeing you back at the building next Wednesday night. Have a great night in your life groups. We are continuing on in our series called You Asked For It. These are questions that you asked us and to address. And so we're talking about all sorts of tough questions, difficult questions, maybe questions you might get in the world that you want answers to, maybe things that you're not sure about yourself. And so we want to talk about these difficult things. We're not a group that shies away from delving into the big stuff. So we're glad that you're on this journey with us. Last week was awesome. We had Pastor Bob Shyrock at 707, and we asked him a whole bunch of questions, and he did a great job answering those. And that was just a great opportunity for us to be able to hear from him and all the knowledge that he's been able to gain over his lifetime. And we've had a lot of questions over the course of both last week and in the preparation for the series on the idea of science and proving the existence of God and things of that nature. And so I wanted to take a week and just address with you that we don't have to check our brains at the door when we become Christians, that we can engage our brains, like engage our minds in our pursuit of Christ. And so I'm going to show you a couple videos from much smarter people than me, but I'm going to talk about, before I do that, I'm going to talk about a couple of the classical arguments when it comes to apologetics. Apologetics simply means defending the faith. And so we're going to look at a couple of the classical apologetic arguments. The first argument I want to share is a teleological argument. Okay, this is essentially the argument from design. Basically, it says that when you see something that's been designed, you know intuitively that there's a designer. The classic way that the argument's laid out is the example of a watch. If you were to be walking through a field and you find a watch sitting on the ground, you wouldn't pick it up and go, wow, what a great natural development that we have here. This watch that just kind of appeared on the scene. No, we know that this was designed by a designer, that there's a watchmaker. The presence of a watch gives you the idea that there is a watchmaker. In normal life, when you see something that looks designed, you assume there's a designer. So if we put a bunch of things, a bunch of tools or a bunch of nails and screws and pieces of metal in a blender and blended it up, we wouldn't assume that something of order would pop out. We wouldn't assume that a bunch of parts would create something that requires order and design. And our world requires order and design. And so therefore we say, hey, it looks designed, therefore there must be a designer. The second argument I want to talk about is a cosmological argument. It gives us the idea that what we see in our universe must have a cause. All right, and that initial cause has to be an uncaused cause. All right, the initial cause of the universe must be an uncaused cause. Why does it have to be an uncaused cause? The thing that caused everything else, why does that initial thing have to be uncaused? Because if you don't have that, then you have what they call an infinite regress of causes. Essentially what that means is you just go, okay, well, where did that come from? Well, it came from atoms, it came from the Big Bang. Well, where did the Big Bang came from? It came from this matter that was existing and that was spinning around in a spiral in the middle of nothingness and then exploded into the universe. Where did that little ball of matter come from? Well, that came from it just goes back and back and back, because no matter, things that we see and can touch, none of that can be eternal. It can't have always existed, nor will it exist forever. And when scientists talk about this idea of the Big Bang, that's the origins of the universe. Well, what came before that? What was this uncaused cause? Otherwise, you have an infinite regress and you go back and back and back and back and it never stops. You have an infinite regress of causes. There has to be an initial cause. Something has to have started the whole thing. And fortunately for us, the scriptures give us an answer for that. Gives us an answer that the world, that science on its own does not have. And the answer that scripture gives us for that, it happens in the very beginning of the Bible and it's repeated later. It's these simple words in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Very first words of the Bible, in the beginning, God. In the beginning, God. And if we flip over to John chapter 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word, meaning Jesus, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. So God was there at the very start of all things. He's the uncaused cause. I'm not going to get into evolution and whether it happened the way that Darwin thought. We talked a little bit about that last week with Pastor Bob, but the bottom line is that evolution is not a satisfactory explanation for the origins of life apart from God. I'll say that again. Evolution is not a satisfactory explanation for the origins of life apart from God. I'm going to show you, like I mentioned, a couple of videos. This first one is by a guy named Dr. William Lane Craig. And he's going to talk about this idea of evolution as an explanation for life apart from God. And he's not going to talk about it from the perspective of the Bible per se, but more of the perspective of science. Go ahead and check it out.
Now, he did make some remarks about the theory of evolution, which at least insinuated that this was somehow incompatible with theism. And I have 2 points to make about this. First, I think that the theory of biological evolution is simply irrelevant to the truth of Christian theism. Genesis 1 admits all manner of different interpretations, and one is by no means committed to six-day creationism. Howard Van Til, who is a professor at Calvin College, writes, "Is the concept of special creation required of all persons who trust in the Creator God of Scripture? Most Christians in my acquaintance who are engaged with either scientific or biblical scholarship have concluded that the special creationist picture of the world's formation is not a necessary component of Christian belief. Nor is this a retreat caused by modern science. St. Augustine in the AD 300s, in his commentary on Genesis, pointed out that the days don't need to be taken literally, nor need the creation be a few thousand years ago. Indeed, he suggested that God made the world with certain special potencies that would gradually unfold over time and develop. And this interpretation came 1,500 years before Darwin, so that it is not a forced retreat in the face of modern science. So any doubts that I would have about the theory of biological evolution would be not biblical, but rather scientific. Namely, what it imagines is fantastically improbable. Barrow and Tipler, 2 physicists, in their book The Anthropic Cosmological Principle, list 10 steps in the course of human evolution, each of which is so improbable that before it would occur, the sun would have ceased to be a main sequence star and incinerated the Earth. And they calculate the probability of the evolution of the human genome to be somewhere between 4 to the negative 180th power to the 110,000th power, and 4 to the negative 360th power to the 110,000th power. So if evolution did occur on this planet, it was literally a miracle, and therefore evidence for the existence of God. So I don't think this is an argument for atheism, quite the contrary. It really provides good grounds for thinking that God superintended the process of biological development. So the Christian can be open to the evidence to follow it where it leads. By contrast, as Alvin Plantinga has said, for the naturalist, evolution is the only game in town. No matter how fantastic the odds, no matter how improbable, it's got to be true, because there is no intelligent creator and designer. So in one sense, you've got to feel a little sorry for the atheist. He can't really follow the evidence where it leads. His presuppositions determine the outcome. By contrast, if there is a fine-tuner and creator of the universe, then already in the initial conditions of the Big Bang, you have an elaborately designed universe that permits the evolution and existence of intelligent life. And I think evolution simply layers on more improbability.
It's a great argument about the fact that the theory of evolution cannot be a good evidence against the existence of God. As he says, evolution simply layers on more improbability to all of this happening by chance. This next video I'm excited to show you as well. It's by a guy named Dr. John Lennox. He's a very smart guy from Oxford over in the UK. And here in this video, Dr. John Lennox is talking to us about the origins of science and how we can even have confidence in our own brains, our own minds, to practice science if science is on its own. So go ahead and check this out. I think it's a really unique perspective from a scientist.
I wouldn't do science if I didn't believe it could be done. But what's involved? What do you have to believe in order to do science? You have to believe that the universe is approachable by human reason. You can ask it questions and you get answers. Now, why would you believe that? Now, this is a very interesting thing, because the early pioneers of science, Kepler, Galileo, Newton, and so on, would tell you instantly why they believed science could be done. Why was it? Because they believed in a creator. C.S. Lewis, as usual, puts it beautifully when he says, men became scientific. Why? Because they expected law in nature. Why? Because they believed in a lawgiver. That was the motor that drove science. It's ironic that so many scientists now don't believe in God when the early pioneers that gave us modern science did believe in God. And I'm not remotely embarrassed to be both a scientist and a Christian, for the reason that, if I may put it this way, Christianity gave me my subject. So there's no reason for me to be embarrassed by it. But now, let's take the atheist perspective. And I often have fun with this, you know, when I meet colleagues. I ask them, what do you do science with? They say, well, I got this £1 million machine in my lab. I said, I don't mean that. I mean this. Oh, they say, you mean my, and they almost say mind, and they remember not to say mind because there's no such thing as mind, according to them. They say my brain. Well, I say, okay, I do believe there's a distinction between the mind and the brain, a very big one, but many of them don't. Okay, you do science with your brain. Tell me about the brain. Well, do you want the long story or the short story? The short story, please. Okay, here's the shortest possible story of the brain. The brain is the end result of an unguided process that didn't have it in mind. And I just say to them, and you trust it? And you trust it? Why on earth would you trust the product of an unguided, mindless process? Now, this is a serious objection. You might, some of you, be surprised to learn it was first raised by Charles Darwin. It's called Darwin's doubt. And he said, look, essentially, in my belief, the mind of humans arose from the mind of lower animals, but would you trust a monkey's mind if there's anything in such a mind? Now, that has shifted now to move into center stage in this whole debate. C.S. Lewis saw it in the 1940s. He said, no line of reasoning can be valid that invalidates reason. Let me repeat that. No reasoning can be valid that invalidates reason. And what happens is that the current naturalistic explanation for the human mind invalidates reason. Now, it's not only Christians who are saying this. That's the fascinating thing. One of the world's leading philosophers is a man called Thomas Nagel. And he's written a book with an explosive subtitle. I've never read a subtitle like it. The title is very innocent, Mind and Cosmos. The subtitle is not. Why the neo-Darwinian view of the world is almost certainly false. Now, this is an atheist writing. And if you want to see the waves he's caused, just look him up in cyberspace. And he's essentially taking this argument that if we are reducing our thoughts essentially to mindless, unguided processes or movements of atoms and elementary particles, we are snatching the rug from under the feet of any validation that our cognitive processes could be valid. So we've no reason to trust them. And that cannot be so. So here we have the fascinating situation that Christianity gives a base for trusting reason and was the inspiration for the rise of modern science, whereas atheism is undermining that in a very big way, and some atheists are beginning to see it. So watch this space. I think there's going to be an increasingly fascinating debate about it. So we might sum the position up. I think this is one of the best statements of it by the American Christian philosopher, who's a world-class philosopher, Alvin Plantinga. If Dawkins is right that we are the product of mindless, unguided natural processes, then he has given us strong reason to doubt the reliability of human cognitive faculties, and therefore inevitably to doubt the validity of any belief that they produce, including Dawkins' own science and his atheism. His biology and his belief in naturalism would therefore appear to be at war with each other in a conflict that has nothing at all to do with God. Or putting it another way, I'm often asked to speak to the title, "Has Science Buried God?" My answer is no, but science is beginning to do a good job of burying atheism. Because what I'm saying is, you can't have science and atheism logically coexisting. If you're going to validity to science, you have to validate human cognitive processes. So you mustn't adhere to a naturalistic philosophy that undermines them and destroys them. This seems to me to be one of the central things. So let me sum it up in a very simple way. One of my main reasons as a scientist for not being an atheist is that I can do science. It's nothing to do with my Christianity in that sense, although it has indirectly. It's to do with my science.
To boil it all down, I just want you to get the idea today that all truth is God's truth. All truth is God's truth. And so don't be threatened by any truth or any possible truth out there. You can engage it. You can investigate it. You can look at the evidence. And at the end of the day, I believe if you truly evaluate all of the evidence, that you'll come away confident, as I am, that everything that we see didn't come from nothing, but it came from a creator, God.